kind of dove into podcasting because the job I was in, the place was moving, and they just closed down their warehouse operations. So I was without a job. I had returned to school that year. Like, my interests have always been in something creative. And, I always wanted to be a writer. Do I want to write a novel? Well, maybe I started getting really into shows like Sopranos, Mad Men, whatever. Maybe I'd like to write a series.
Yeah.
Maybe I like to do it. So that's always been where my thought process is at. So when I went back to school for creative writing and then screenwriting, that's where my focus was. But then I lost the job and I had even more free time. Well, what can I do? And I woke up one Saturday and I went to the Monster Factory in Jersey. They had a Joel Gertner seminar. And I always think, like, I almost didn't go because I went out the night before. I woke up, I was like, oh, I'm fucking hungover. My wife was like, just go. You never know. Just go. And so I always picture myself walking towards the car and going, fuck this, and just going back in to lay down, So I started making my connections originally in Jersey through the Monster Factory and Danny Cage and Joel Gertner, and a lot of the guys that were there then are now on TV. QT Marshall, Punisher Martinez is Damian Priest now. Matt Riddle was there. Mm-hmm. Nick Camarado's coming up in I almost said TNA in AEW. And so I got lucky with my guests. What happened was I started podcasting because originally I started writing articles or reviews, or I would like interview guys. I had some interviews with Homicide and Ruckus and Luke Hawks and guys like that. And someone was like, listen, you should just try to get into podcasting, start a podcast, because that's where it's at now. That's people are, it's a big deal. It's really starting to come up. I wasn't a fan of it. I wasn't a fan of my voice. I just didn't think I would be good at it. And but I just, something told me to start it. People kind of convinced me to just try it, whatever. So I started. It took me a long time to get reasonably adequate, believe me. But like, I got lucky to start. Like, originally I'd had Danny Cage and Gertner as my first guests. And then episode 2 was Steve Carino. And then somewhere in the first 10, I had J.J. Dillon. And then I had Ed Ferrara. And then it was like, I kept getting lucky. And then after, I think, like episode 25, between 25 and 40, I had Bruce Pritchard, Vince Russo, and Disco. And
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, my guest list was getting great. I eventually had Al Snow and DDP and Shane Helms. I forget because I had such a good. I had Matt.
Yeah.
But what happened with Konnan was, and the reason I mentioned my other guests is because I think Disco and Russo, maybe both of them, Konnan asked, like, who the fuck is this guy? And they probably put in a good word, even if they wouldn't admit it. I don't think Disco would ever admit it. Maybe Vince. But Konnan started keeping it 100 in the summer of 2016. And I started listening to it because I was a fan of his from what he did on MLW radio with MSL and Court Bauer. And I didn't like it at first. And it was mostly because of the co-host, I think. But it was different. MSL and Court weren't there. It was Konnan and Disco and Kevin Gill. And I didn't like it. I tuned it out. And then eventually I started listening to it again. And I would listen to it when I cleaned up the house or went for, a walk or whatever. I would just, let me listen to the podcast. And it started to grow on me. And I had bothered Konnan for years to come on Creative Control. And I was like, dude, I don't fucking know you. I'm not coming on your show. But he knew that I did the show. He knew that I interviewed, and he knew that I produced it and edited it and uploaded it. And I was just learning to get sponsors and all that stuff. So he messaged me on Facebook, and he's like, listen, man, I need to make a change over here. He wasn't getting along with Kevin Gill, and he didn't think Kevin Gill was doing his share of the work. He would claim he was editing the show, and he would send it to like a couple other guys who just wanted to help the show, And the main thing was the personality clash, but it was also like laziness.
Yeah.
So he's like, listen, I'd like to have you come on, and you would record with us and help with the scheduling, and then edit the show, and blah blah blah. Do you know how the show goes? I said, yes, I do. I listen. I know the flow. I know all this stuff. So I started, and initially I wasn't on the show. I wasn't on the air. And to be honest, at that point, I was perfectly fine with that. Like, I never really thought about it. I never, and now I'm on these different shows. It sounds strange, but I would have been perfectly fine with just producing and looking for ads and whatever. So, and then they would bring me in little by little after that. But a few months later, KG and Konnan had this big blow up over. Yeah, I think I played it on Rehash recently.
Yeah.
He crushed KG's Triple Mania commentary, and that was on top of other disagreements they'd had for weeks. And you could tell it wasn't like harmless busting balls.
Banter, yeah.
It was like they were being mean spirited to each other, kind of thing. Like they really weren't getting
trying to rip each other down, you know?
Yeah, and you're not going to really win a war of words or any kind of mental chess with Konnan. He's a few moves ahead. He's really very, very, very intelligent and very savvy when it comes to how to bury someone, you know? So he he had no chance. So yeah, to step back just a little bit. So yeah, he messaged me about, would you be able to do the show? I said, yeah, I understand the format. And I know perfectly how to edit it. Dude, my editing at that point was like, I just recorded like a phone call and would release it. It was terrible, horrible.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. But when opportunity's knocking on your door, I was just like, of course I can edit it. So I actually learned a lot as I was going with Konnan, because skills that I hadn't needed for my low budget show, you know, and I kept getting better and better. But yeah, so of course I accepted the thing, and everybody, you know, we all got along, I thought, until it really became clear how he thought about KG. I know Kevin Kleinrock said, he's like, because I had interviewed Kleinrock a couple of times too, so I'm assuming he also put in a good word for me. He said, the minute I heard Konnan, like Konnan asked me about you or asked who you were, and the minute I heard you were coming aboard, I thought KG was done that day. He's like, I was surprised. I'm surprised he was on after that. So it was more a matter of me getting comfortable and accustomed to the show and all that, I guess. And then they had that final blow up, and Konnan was like, fuck it. You cool with coming on as the third guy? And I said, yeah. So it was the moral of the story is like luck, timing, and perseverance. You know, I was lucky that I had this free time from losing the job. The timing, I just happened to have really good timing when it came to getting guests or whatever. And then with Konnan, I persevered and badgered him until he couldn't forget who I was, you know. So then I was the one that he called when he needed someone to help with the show.
That's amazing, man. And, you know, to be able to be brought on to do a show with someone as well, it's like you have to have that certain chemistry with someone as well to be able to go on there and interact and, you know, not to sort of talk over each other. You know what I mean? Like you have to be almost like in sync with each other. And it sort of takes a while to get that. Did it take you a while once you sort of got on air to sort of fit into that and be the third guy? Or did it just sort of naturally happen for you guys where you just came in and it was like a natural fit?
I think it, there were stages. Like at first I wasn't sure when to interject, or I was like terrified of saying something stupid because they'd bury me. It was not the attitude to have on that show. So, yeah. And like at first, like if Konnan would bury me on the show or on Twitter, like I started taking a little personal. I got it, but I didn't get it yet, you know. And I was all up in my feelings about it at that point, you know. It didn't last long, and there was never any question of like, fucking hate this, I'm gonna quit. But some of the things bother me, you know. And I think it didn't take long. Like a year later, you would hear and see like this is the show now, and it didn't feel like I was a substitution or someone being shoved into the spot, you know.
Yeah.
And when Disco and Konnan are on, they don't even really particularly need a third guy. Disco doesn't need anyone. He could
no, he doesn't.
He can talk underwater, man. Fuck.
Yeah, but no, I think once I got super comfortable, which I am now, and stopped taking things so seriously, I think, it felt great. And that was like, and I've been that way since. Like now, everybody gets it. Everybody, we just work very, very well together, you know. And it's a super tight unit, and that's it. That's K100 now. It's Konnan, Disco, and Joe, and I'm happy to be a part of it, you know. So it took me a little bit. It took me a little adjustment to be the fucking third wheel, you know. Sometimes, you know, crash dummy, you know, that would take the beating. But once I got used to it, I love the show. I love doing it.
And how did you, like, because you also do the Raven effect with with Raven as well. And you know, how did that sort of come about? Was that in correlation, like with, you know, Raven starting his podcast? Was it like, you know, reaching out to Konnan, hey, who do you recommend for this role, or you know, or how did that come about for you?
No, it was totally unrelated, actually. And what it was, like, I knew Raven a little bit because I would try to get him on the show, of course. And then I had this short story published about wrestling maybe 5 years ago. And that's another way I tried to get noticed, was I would send copies of the book to guys who I wanted, you know, advice from, or them to, just to notice and maybe consider me for whatever. Which, you know, Konnan got a book, Disco got a book, Russo got a book, and there was more. Some of my guests, I can't remember everybody. But I sent a book to Raven, and he emailed me back, and he was like, you know, I thought you were a wrestler. He's like, I was scratching my brain, like, who's this under the pseudonym, you know, like, who is? And then he's like, because the character in the story, he was a former Marine who became a wrestler. He's like, I was thinking, who was it? Road Dogg? Did Road Dogg write this? He's like, it was good to the point where I was fooled for a minute. I forgot that you were you, and I was trying to figure out what wrestler was writing this. So that was a huge compliment from someone.
That's great.
Yeah, someone I consider really smart. You know, really funny, not afraid to probably tell you when something sucks too. So from there, I helped him with little things, because he did the Raven Effect prior to being on MLW Radio. He was on the Jericho Network with the rest of those guys.
Yeah.
On Westwood One and Podcast One before that. And he had a co-host who was he called Busby, who was I
remember hearing Busby,
Busby.
He actually was like in WCW, Chad Damiani. Now he's like a improv comedian. I guess he teaches clown classes, clown college. That's a real thing, right? But the show that he did with Raven, that was like, they would always try to top each other and say something more obscure or funny. And it was like, that was their dynamic. So I don't think I'm anywhere near as quick-witted as Busby was. I really don't. But it's very to real quick, I finally got him on the show, Raven, and like I said, I had some dealings with him where I helped him get guests, and if we were both at the convention in Philly, like, we'd say what's up or whatever. And I was trying to get him ads at one point and all this. So that's how we were already familiar with each other. I'd book him for Konnan's show. And I finally got him to do Creative Control. He was one of those guys that was like one of my last wrestling guests that I thought was doable, that I could get, and that I really wanted. Like, it was a, you know, top of the mountain thing. There was guys like, I really like Bischoff, Raven, and Konnan were like top guys I wanted to talk to. Russo, Pritchard. And I wound up getting them all, which is where I kind of lost my interest in wrestling podcasting. But so Raven did the show, and I went out of my way to not ask him the same old questions, right?
Yeah.
And that just made an impression on him, I guess. And he stayed on the phone with me afterwards. He's like, man, that was really good. That was different. You know, I appreciate you not asking me the same things and all that. And I didn't think anything more was going to come of it. I was just happy to get him on the show. And then like a week later, he called me, and he's like, listen, do you want to do the Raven Effect? And I'm like, huh, what? He's like, I thought we had a good rapport. You know, I thought you had interesting things to say, and, you know, the questions were good, and we just interacted well. And he's like, Busby left, and I'm doing the show with Rich Bikini now, and I'm not sure if the two of us together is the way to go. So I wanted to bring you in for a couple of weeks as the third guy and see what the dynamic was like. And that was it. I've been on ever since. I've been on for almost 2 years.
Wow.
So I will say this. Yeah. Like, I was a listener with when Busby was on, and when he left, I was kind of disappointed. And then, this isn't to blow smoke up your ass, but when Rich came on, I was kind of like, fuck, like, I don't think I could listen to this, because it just